Relax and listen to the voice. The Babysitter. There was a young girl who was in need of a job and was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of their 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing, followed by a man's voice asking, "Have you checked the children?" Freaked out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself that it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard hysterical laughter from the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked, "Why haven't you checked the children?" The babysitter slammed down the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try to keep him talking. That would give the police enough time to trace his phone call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a 3rd time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard the heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said, "You should really check on the children." The babysitter listened to him laughing hysterically for a long time. She hung up the phone again, and almost immediately, it rang again. This time it was the operator from the police station who yelled, "Get out of the house right now! The calls are coming from upstairs! The calls are coming from the upstairs phone!" The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs would carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, a man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran out into the street just as a police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found 2 of the children upstairs hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe lying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was wide open, and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had made the phone calls. He had escaped into the night when the police arrived and managed to interrupt his horrible plan to kill the 2 children and the poor babysitter. Baby Blue. According to the urban legend, a group of girls found out about the blue baby story and decided to try it out. They didn't believe it would work, so they sent their friend Laura into the bathroom on her own. She turned the lights off and closed the door behind her. Laura put out her arms and started chanting the phrase, "Blue baby, baby blue, blue baby, baby blue, blue baby, baby blue, blue baby, baby blue." All of a sudden, a baby appeared in her arms and began scratching her. Laura was scared out of her wits and had no idea what to do. She wanted to drop it and run, but she was afraid of what might happen. She just stood there, holding the invisible baby as it grew heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she caught sight of something horrible in the bathroom mirror and screamed in terror. When Laura's friends heard her screaming, they tried to open the bathroom door, but it was locked. Finally, they managed to run to a friend's house and get help. When they broke open the door, they found Laura lying dead on the bathroom floor. Her eyes had been scratched out. They couldn't move her body because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. The Candyman. They say that many years ago, the Candyman was a real man. Back in the days of slavery, Candyman was a black slave named Daniel Robital who worked on a plantation in New Orleans. He was a talented painter and was chosen by the plantation owner to paint a portrait of his daughter. But Daniel fell in love with the daughter of the white plantation owner. When the racist plantation owner discovered that his daughter and the slave were in love, he raised an angry mob and chased Daniel out of town. Armed with pitchforks and a pack of dogs, they chased the poor slave across the fields and streams. Finally, they caught up with the exhausted slave near an old barn. The evil men seized Daniel and cut off his right hand with a rusty saw. Then they covered him in honey and threw him into a beehive. The unfortunate Candyman was in terrible pain and died from his injuries, but not before he cursed the men who killed him and vowed to return and exact his revenge. They say his spirit would never rest, and now his ghost walks the world for all of eternity, appearing when his name is called 5 times. So remember, you can say Candyman once, twice, 3 times, or 4, but never say it 5 times, or you'll be sorry forevermore. Carmen Winstead. Carmen Winstead was 17 years old when her parents decided to move to Indiana. Her father had lost his job, and the only way he could find new employment was by moving to a new state. The relocation caused a lot of problems for Carmen. She had to leave her friends behind and attend a whole new school in Indiana. Carmen had a hard time making friends when she changed schools. It was the middle of the school year, and most of the students had no interest in befriending a new girl. Initially, she spent many days alone, walking from class to class without speaking to anyone, but she eventually started hanging around with a group of 5 other girls. Carmen thought these girls were her friends, but it wasn't long before she discovered that they had been talking about her behind her back and spreading vile rumors. When she confronted them, the girls turned on her and began bullying her every day, making her life a miserable existence. They started out by calling her names, but then the bullying got much worse. One day, she left her school books in the classroom at break time. When she returned, she found someone had taken a Sharpie and written dirty words all over her books. Another day, she opened her bag and discovered that someone had poured yogurt all over the insides. Sometimes she would come to school and find her locker had been vandalized. The final straw came when she put on her coat at recess and found that someone had stuffed dog feces in her pockets. There and then, Carmen decided that she couldn't take the bullying any longer. She planned to stay behind that evening after school and tell her teacher what had been happening. Unfortunately, her decision came too late to save her life. After lunch, her teacher announced that the school was holding a fire drill. When the alarm sounded, Carmen and the other students filed out of the classroom and assembled in the yard outside. As the teachers read out the roll call, the gang of 5 girls decided that this was a great opportunity to embarrass Carmen in front of the whole school during the fire drill. They moved over to where Carmen was standing near a sewer drain and began crowding the poor girl, getting in her face and nudging her towards the open manhole. They pushed her and she tripped over and fell headfirst down the manhole. When they saw her falling, the girls started giggling, and when Carmen's name was called out, they shouted, "She's down in the sewer!" All of the other students began laughing, but when the teachers looked down the manhole and saw Carmen's body lying at the bottom, in the muck and the feces, the laughter abruptly stopped. Her head was twisted around at an odd angle, and her face was covered in blood. Worse still, she wasn't moving. There was nothing any of the teachers could do for her. Carmen was dead. When the police arrived and went down into the sewer, they determined that she had broken her neck. A large portion of her face had been torn off when she hit the ladder on the way down, and her neck snapped when she landed on her head on the concrete at the bottom. The police hauled Carmen's body out of the sewer and sent her to the mortuary. Everyone had to stay behind after school while the police questioned all of Carmen's classmates. The 5 girls lied to the police, saying that they had not witnessed Carmen falling down the sewer. The police believed the girls, and Carmen Winstead's death was ruled an accident, and the case was closed. Everyone thought that was the last they would hear of Carmen Winstead, but they were wrong. Months later, Carmen's classmates began receiving strange emails on their MySpaces. The emails were titled, "They Pushed Her," and they claimed that Carmen hadn't really fallen down into the sewer, that she had been pushed. The emails also warned that the guilty people should own up and take responsibility for their crime, and if they didn't, there would be horrible consequences. Most people dismissed the emails as a hoax, but others were not quite so sure. A few days later, one of the girls who pushed Carmen down the sewer was at home taking a shower when she heard a strange cackling laugh. It seemed to be coming from inside of her drain. The girl started to freak out and ran out of the bathroom. That night, the girl said goodnight to her mom and she went to sleep. 5 hours later, her mom was awoken in the middle of the night by a loud noise that resounded throughout the entire house. She ran into her daughter's room, only to find it empty. There was no trace of the girl. The worried mother called the police, and when they arrived, they conducted a search of the area. Eventually, they discovered the girl's grisly remains. Her corpse was lying in the sewer, covered in muck and feces. Her neck was broken, and a portion of her face was missing. It had been completely torn off. One by one, all of the girls who pushed Carmen that day were found dead. They had all been killed in exactly the same way, and were all found at exactly the same spot, in the sewer, at the bottom of the same uncovered manhole where Carmen had met her doom. The killing didn't stop there. More and more of Carmen's former classmates were found dead, and it seemed that anyone who didn't believe that Carmen had been pushed was eventually found down in the sewer with their necks broken and their faces torn apart. They say that Carmen's ghost is still on the rampage, hunting down anyone who doesn't believe her story. According to the legend, Carmen will get you, whether it's from a toilet, a shower, a sink, or a drain. When you go to sleep, you'll wake up in the sewer, in complete darkness, paralyzed, unable to move, hearing cackling laughter all around you. Then, as you scream in horror, Carmen will come and tear your face off. So be careful who you bully, because you just might find yourself on the receiving end of the curse of Carmen Winstead. The Clown Statue. A few years ago, there was a wealthy couple who had 2 young children, a boy and a girl. The family lived in a large house in Newport Beach, California. After taking care of their kids all week, the mother and father decided that they needed a break, so they booked a table for dinner at a very nice restaurant. That evening, they called a teenage girl they knew and arranged for her to come over and babysit their children while they were out. When the babysitter arrived, the parents told her to fix supper for the kids and put them to bed. After that, you can just watch TV and help yourself to anything in the fridge, said the father. And if you wouldn't mind, said the mother, could you watch TV in our bedroom? The kids have been having nightmares recently, so if you hear them crying, you can just go in and calm them down. The babysitter happily agreed, and the parents left for their dinner date. The girl gave the children some milk and cookies, then ushered them upstairs to bed. She started to read them a bedtime story, and, before long, the little boy and little girl were fast asleep. After tucking them in, she switched off the lights and went to watch TV. When the babysitter walked into the parents' bedroom and sat down, she noticed that there was a creepy-looking clown statue standing in the corner of the room. She tried to ignore it, but it looked so eerie and disturbing that it sent chills down her spine. She felt as though its eyes were staring straight at her while she watched TV. As time passed, the babysitter started to feel more and more uneasy about the clown statue. Whenever she glanced at it, she got the unsettling feeling that it had moved ever so slightly. Finally, The clown statue began to freak her out so much that she couldn't even handle it any longer. She decided to go downstairs and phone the parents. When she dialed the number they had left for her, the mother answered. "Hi, it's me," said the babysitter. "Everything's fine. The kids are fast asleep in bed, but I was just wondering, would it be okay if I watch TV downstairs?" "Of course," replied the parents, "but why?" "Well, I know it sounds silly," laughed the girl, "but the clown statue is really creeping me out." "The clown statue?" asked the father. "Yeah, the clown statue in your bedroom," the girl replied. The phone went silent for a moment. "Listen to me very carefully," said the father. "Take the children and get out of the house. We will call the police. Go right now." "What's wrong?" asked the girl. The father gulped and replied, "We don't have a clown statue." For a second, the babysitter just stood there, stunned. Then she dropped the phone and raced upstairs and grabbed the children. Carrying one under each arm, she raced downstairs again and fled out into the street. Huddled on the sidewalk, comforting the two children, the babysitter looked up at the bedroom window and saw something that made her scream out in horror. Peeking through a gap in the curtains was the white painted face of a clown. It stared at her for a moment and then sank back into the darkness. Within minutes, the police arrived and cautiously entered the house. In the upstairs bedroom, they found a man dressed in a clown suit. When they arrested him, they found a knife concealed in his costume. The clown turned out to be a mentally disturbed little person who was a convicted murderer and cold-blooded killer. The evil man had been stalking the family for months, lurking in their attic during the daytime and coming out to sneak around the house at night. For weeks, the children had been complaining about a clown statue that stood in their room and watched them sleep. But the parents, though they had the best intentions, just dismissed this as a series of the children's nightmares. The Hook. One summer night, a teenage boy was going out on a date with his new girlfriend. He picked her up at her house, and they drove out to the edge of town. They parked the car in a secluded spot that was a well-known lover's lane. As they gazed out at the lights of the town, the boy put his arm around the girl and switched on the car radio so that they could listen to some romantic music. He leaned over, and the young couple began kissing and cuddling. Just as they were getting into the mood, the music suddenly stopped, and a newsreader's voice came on the radio. "This is an emergency announcement. Earlier tonight, a crazed murderer escaped from the state mental asylum. Police are warning citizens to be on their guard since the patient is considered armed and dangerous. The insane killer is nicknamed the Hook Man because after he lost his right hand in an accident, it was replaced with a steel hook. Everyone in the area should be on the lookout for a man fitting this description. If you see anything suspicious, you should report it to the police immediately." The girl became frightened and asked to be taken home. She knew that the state insane asylum was not far from the lover's lane. She was also worried that the remote area where they were parked was the perfect spot for a deranged madman to lurk. The boy was feeling brave and assured his girlfriend that they were perfectly safe. He locked all the car doors, then tried to kiss her again, but the girl became frantic and pushed him away, insisting that they leave immediately. In a huff, the boy slammed the car into gear and spun its wheels as he pulled out of the parking space. On the way back to town, they both calmed down, but the girl still held on tightly to her boyfriend. When they pulled up outside the girl's house, the boy got out of the car and walked around to open the door for his girlfriend. For a long time, he just stood there, staring at the door. At first, the girl couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then she realized that her door was still locked. She smiled and unlocked it. Still, the boy just stood there. The girl was puzzled and rolled down her window. Then she saw that the boy was staring down at the door handle. Slowly, she looked down herself, and then she began to scream uncontrollably. There, hanging from the door handle, was a bloody stainless steel hook. The Smith Sisters' Anonymous Murders. There was a boy named John Smith who lived in Plainfield, Wisconsin. He was very fond of scary emails and pop-ups. Every day, he would find new ones and send them to everyone he knew. He even started making some himself and sending them to strangers. He loved to scare people on the internet. One day, in November of 2007, he opened up his inbox and found a message that appeared to be from two young girls. They called themselves the Smith Sisters and told him they were his older sisters, which confused him because he was an only child. They also said that, years ago, they had lived in his house. He replied saying he didn't have any sisters and told him to get lost and leave him alone. The next day, he received a chilling message with some photo attachments. The first photo was of two young girls. The caption on it said, "Smith Sisters murdered anonymously." In the email, the girls said that they were indeed his older sisters. They told him that in 1993 they had lived in his house. His bedroom had once been their bedroom. They told him all about growing up and about their lives and how happy they had been until one horrible night. He opened up the other attachment. It was a scan of an old newspaper article, which read, "In 1993, two sisters were brutally murdered in the small-town community of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Lisa Smith, 19, and her sister, Sarah Smith, 15, were attacked in their parents' home on the night of November 17th, around 1:30 a.m. The Smith sisters were lying in bed when a crazed killer broke into the house. No one heard them scream. In the morning, their parents found the dead bodies of the Smith sisters hidden in the bedroom closet. They had been skinned alive. The killer was long gone and no trace of him could be found. They had been murdered anonymously. Police conducted an extensive investigation, but to no avail. The motives for the attack were never discovered, nor was the attacker ever found. The only lead authorities had was a series of strange emails found in Lisa's computer. This case was officially closed in October of the year 2000. In the rest of the email, the sisters said that they were angry that the case was closed and that people had forgotten about them. They were angry that their parents wanted to forget about them too. They were angry that their parents decided to start over and had a new baby. That little baby named John. They were angry that their parents had never mentioned their daughters or their tragic murder to their new son, John. John Smith sent an angry email reply saying that he didn't believe what they were saying. He didn't believe that the Smith sisters were really related to him, and he didn't believe the newspaper article was real. He told them that they could go to hell. 5 minutes later, he got another email from them. It said, "If you don't believe us, look in the bedroom closet." That was the last email that was found on John's computer. Police were unable to trace who had sent the messages to him. On the floor of the closet, the police found a faint message carved in the wood. It simply read, "Lisa and Sarah, 1993. Underneath that was another carving that read, "John, 2007. No one knows what John did next, but in the morning, John's parents woke up to find their son missing. Then they checked his bedroom closet and got the second greatest shock of their lives. There they found the dead body of their son. He had been skinned alive. No one knows what really happened that night. Police were only able to piece together parts of the story based on what they found on John's computer. The parents were devastated. How could this happen to a family? How could this happen again? First their daughters were murdered, and now years later on, their son is murdered. It seemed too weird to just be a coincidence. The two sisters are murdered, and then years later, their brother is murdered in exactly the same way, in exactly the same place, and the only evidence left behind are a few scary emails. The police investigated the parents and found no conclusive evidence that the parents had anything to do with the murders or disappearances of any of the children. It really makes you wonder. The Kidney Heist. There was a young man who was going to college. He went to Las Vegas with his buddies for spring break. They were all having a good time, going from bar to bar and gulping down drink after drink. They stopped at one bar where a band was playing music, and pretty soon the friends were all laughing and singing and shouting loudly. The young man had just finished another drink when a beautiful young woman came up to him and started chatting. He was surprised and flattered at the same time. The woman seemed to be really attracted to him, so when she invited him to another party, he readily agreed. Leaving his friends in the bar, the young man followed her to an apartment on the outskirts of the city. When they went inside, there was already a party in full swing. They continued to drink, and they even danced a little. Then the girl began rummaging around in her handbag and took out a small pouch. Inside there were 2 pills. She took one of the pills out and popped it in her mouth. Then, with a smile, she offered the other one to him. Although the young man would usually never do drugs, he decided to try it out, just this once. He thanked her, took the pill, and swallowed it, and that was the last thing he remembered. The next morning, he woke up in an unfamiliar hotel room. Looking around, he realized that he was lying completely naked, submerged up to his neck in a bathtub filled with ice. Groggy and disoriented, he frantically tried to remember how he had ended up there. He was confused, he was scared, and he was in a lot of pain. That's when he spotted a crumpled note lying on the floor next to the bathtub. It read, "If you don't want to die, call 911. There was a cell phone sitting on the table by the bathtub. He picked it up and dialed the number, his fingers numb and clumsy from the ice. When the operator answered, the young man explained that he didn't know where he was or how he got there, but he was in a lot of pain. When he mentioned the bathtub filled with ice and the note, the operator seemed oddly familiar with the situation. She said to him, "Sir, can you do the following for me? Slowly and carefully get out of the bath and examine yourself in the mirror." The man grabbed the towel rack and pulled himself up out of the ice. Looking over at the mirror, he saw that there were 2 9-inch slits in his lower back. When he described the injuries, the operator said, "I want you to get back into the bath, sir. The paramedics are on their way. We've pinged your location with your cell phone. Do not move until they arrive." "What happened to me?" asked the young man nervously. "I don't want you to panic," said the operator, "but last night you were drugged. Someone has probably removed both of your kidneys. There's a ring of organ thieves operating in this city. They harvest kidneys and sell them on the black market." As the story goes, the young man is currently in the hospital on a life support machine, still awaiting a kidney donor. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. A boy and his friend were on their way to a dance, driving down a lonely country road. They saw a young girl standing at the side of the road with her thumb out. The boy stopped and asked if she needed a ride. She asked them if they'd take her home, but they told her they were on their way to a dance. They asked the girl if she'd like to come too, and she accepted their invitation. So they all got in the car and she sat in the back seat. It was a very cold night, and she borrowed one of their overcoats. They danced all night, and when it got late, she asked them to take her home, so they drove her to her house and stopped to let her out. Suddenly, one of the boys remembered that he had forgotten to ask to get his overcoat back. His friend said, "Wait until tomorrow. We'll come back and see her again." The next morning, the boys returned to look for the girl. They found her mother, a very old woman, at home, alone. She said that the girl was her daughter, but that she'd been dead for 12 years. She'd been killed in a car accident on that very same corner where the boys had picked her up. The old woman pointed to a cemetery down the road and said, "That's where my daughter lives now." The boys didn't believe her, and they went into the cemetery and looked around. Then they saw the overcoat draped over a headstone. Engraved in the tombstone was the girl's name and the date of her death, which was exactly 12 years ago to that day. The roommates. Two female college roommates were staying in their dorm room during the university's Christmas vacation. All of the other girls on campus had gone home, so they were completely alone. The roommates were trying to do some studying, but they ended up just spending hours browsing the internet on their laptops. Late that night, one of the girls felt hungry, so she told her roommate she was going to go downstairs to get some food. She assured her friend she would be back in a few minutes. Then she took the keys to open the kitchen door and walked off down the hallway. The other girl sat in her room, using her laptop and waiting for the other roommate to return. After a while, she began to feel sleepy, so she undressed and got into bed. As she was about to fall asleep, she heard a gurgling moan coming from down the hallway. She froze, lying in bed. Her heart started pounding. The sound stopped, but it was replaced by a dragging noise. The girl was terrified. She couldn't lock the door because her roommate had taken the keys with her. All she could do was lie there shivering as the sound drew nearer and nearer. She listened, shaking with fear as the dragging sound came closer and closer, stopping right outside of her door. Then, something began scratching at the door. Frightened beyond belief, the girl jumped out of bed and hid in the closet. The trembling girl was afraid to move a muscle. The scratching noise seemed to go on and on. Eventually, she managed to fall asleep, curled up into the fetal position in the closet. The next morning, the girl cautiously stepped out of the closet. The scratching sounds had stopped, but she was still too frightened to open the door. Looking out of her window, she saw a mailman passing by and shouted to him for help. She heard the mailman's footsteps entering through the college dorm and coming up the stairs into the hallway. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. "Is everything okay?" cried the girl. For a few seconds, there was just silence. "Yeah, everything's okay," shouted the mailman. "Just stay in your room. I'll get the police." "What's wrong?" asked the girl. "Nothing," came the mailman's reply. "Just stay where you are. Don't come out here." But the girl was already turning the handle and opening the door. As the door swung open, the girl saw the mailman standing there, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. Then she looked down and screamed in horror at what she saw. There lay her roommate's dead body, sprawled out on the floor, in a pool of blood. There was a hatchet buried in her head, and her fingernails were worn down to bloody stumps from scratching on the door all night long, trying to get help. The boyfriend. A girl and her boyfriend were driving at night down an isolated country road. As they drove, the night seemed to get darker and darker. Eventually, they lost their way and found themselves driving through a densely wooded area that neither of them recognized. Suddenly, the car started spluttering and stalled. The boyfriend looked at the gauge and realized that they had run out of gas. No matter how many times he turned the key, the engine just would not start. The girlfriend began to panic because it was after midnight and they were stuck in the middle of nowhere and couldn't get home. The boyfriend got out of the car to look around. They were in a secluded and wooded area. All he could see were trees. There seemed to be no houses for miles around, and they were completely alone. The girlfriend was spooked and kept asking the boy to do something. He told her he would have to walk back to the main highway to get help. The boyfriend could see that his fiancée was scared, so he told her not to worry. He would return as fast as he could, but the girl could still see the concern in his face. Kissing her goodbye, he told her to roll up the windows and lock the doors. Then he set out walking down the road. The girl watched as her boyfriend got further and further away and finally disappeared into the darkness. Hours passed and the girl sat shivering in the car, fearful of every shadow she saw and every noise she heard. She began to feel like her boyfriend was never coming back. Suddenly, she heard a tapping noise on the roof of her car. Tap, tap, tap. She began to panic, but was too terrified to get out and investigate. She kept trying to peer out the windows, but it was too dark to see anything. Tap, tap, tap. The tapping noise seemed to go on and on. The girl was scared to death, but there was nothing she could do. Tap, tap, tap. She was forced to remain huddled in the car all night long, listening to the weird tapping sound. Eventually, she managed to fall asleep. When she woke up and looked at her watch, it was 9 a.m. When she tried to look out of the car windows, everything was completely black. She couldn't understand what was going on. Suddenly, she heard a car pull up nearby, and it honked its horn 3 times. Then she heard a voice shouting, "This is the police! Is there anyone in the car?" The girlfriend sighed with relief. "Just me," she cried. "My boyfriend left me here alone and never came back." "Okay, stay calm," said the policeman. "Listen to me very carefully. Open the door, get out of the car, and walk towards me. Whatever you do, do not look behind you." The girl obeyed the policeman's orders, even though her hands were shaking and her mind was racing. She opened the car door and stepped out. "Now walk towards me," said the policeman. "Don't look behind you. Do not look behind you." The girl began walking slowly towards the policeman, but suddenly she stopped in her tracks. "Don't look behind you," shouted the policeman, but it was too late. The girl couldn't help herself. She turned around and began screaming in horror. Her boyfriend's dead body was hanging upside down from a tree branch over the car. His head had been chopped off, and blood was dripping down from his neck, completely covering the car windows. As she stared at the sight, she could see and hear every time a drop of blood hit the car. It went tap, tap, tap. Hello Kitty. The real story of Hello Kitty is a scary urban legend about the origin of the popular Japanese cartoon character. They say that Hello Kitty is demonic and was originally a product of devil worship and a satanic pact. According to the legend, Hello Kitty was created back in the 1970s by a Chinese woman. Apparently, her 14-year-old daughter was diagnosed with cancer of the mouth. The doctors told the mother that her child was terminally ill and that there was nothing that they could do for her. The mother refused to give up hope and visited every church in the city to pray for her daughter. When that didn't work, she came to the end of her rope. The desperate mother became involved with satanic rituals and devil worship. They say that in order to save her daughter's life, she made a pact with the devil himself. For curing her daughter's cancer, the devil demanded only one thing in return. She would have to create a cartoon character that would appeal to children all over the world. The devil wanted to use the popularity of this cartoon character to trick people into worshiping him. When her daughter recovered from her cancer, the mother kept her promise to the devil, and she created Hello Kitty. As the story goes, Hello Kitty was designed with no mouth because the daughter had cancer of the mouth. Hello Kitty's pointed ears represent the devil's horns. The word kitty means demon in Chinese, so Hello Kitty really means hello demon. They say that anyone who buys Hello Kitty merchandise is welcoming the devil into their hearts. Satanists all over the world use Hello Kitty as a secret symbol, and many of them actually tattoo the image in their skin. Devil worshippers refer to Hello Kitty as the daughter of the devil. Of course, this is all just an urban myth. Hello Kitty was actually created by a Japanese company named Sanrio that specializes in designing and branding cartoon characters. Hello Kitty was originally designed to be a decoration on a purse. Also, kitty does not mean demon in Chinese. The designers created Hello Kitty without a mouth because they wanted to make her emotions ambiguous. The blank expression means that you can project your own emotions onto the cartoon. If you're sad, then Hello Kitty could look sad. If you're happy, Hello Kitty might look happy. Hello Kitty will seem to feel whatever emotion you are feeling. So the truth is that Hello Kitty is not associated with satanic rituals or devil worship at all. However, in 1999, a brutal murder took place in Hong Kong. It later became known as the Hello Kitty murder. 3 men kidnapped a young woman and kept her captive in their apartment for a month. They tortured her and then they murdered her. It was known as the Hello Kitty murder because the killers cut off the victim's head and hid it inside of a Hello Kitty doll. Now that is a true story. Buried alive. One day, the old woman fell ill, and her husband spent every day by her bedside, trying to nurse her back to health. Unfortunately, the old woman passed away, and her husband was devastated by the loss. She was his one true love. Soon afterwards, the doctor arrived and pronounced her dead. Because it was the middle of the summer, they had a small funeral service and buried her the next day. The old man was so grief-stricken that as his wife's coffin was being lowered into the grave, he tried to jump in after her. The people at the funeral had to hold him back until the grave was filled in. Lonely and miserable, the old man returned to his empty house. That night, he was awakened by a strange scratching sound. It grew louder and louder, but he couldn't figure out where it was coming from. When he turned over in bed, he was met with a terrifying sight. He saw a figure of a woman standing outside his bedroom window. With horror, he realized it was his wife. Her eyes were sunken and hollow, her mouth was open wide in a silent scream, and her fingers were clawing at the window pane. When he ran to the window and opened it, the figure vanished into thin air. He phoned the doctor immediately and begged to have his wife's body exhumed from the grave. The doctor refused to allow the coffin to be dug up, telling the old man that he was just suffering from stress after his wife's death. But the old man continued to see the same ghostly apparition outside his window every single night. Finally, the old man couldn't stand it anymore. He got out of bed, got dressed, grabbed a shovel, and headed for the graveyard. He came to his wife's grave and began digging and digging. When he eventually unearthed his wife's coffin and pried open the lid, he recoiled in horror. His wife's mouth was wide open, frozen in a silent scream. There were scratch marks all over the inside of the coffin lid, and her fingers were worn down to the bone. Tanning lotion. There was a young woman who was getting married to the man of her dreams. Her wedding day was approaching fast, and she wanted to look her very best. People were always telling her that she looked very pale, so she was determined to get a good tan before the wedding. The woman went to a tanning salon near her house and tried to book an hour on the sunbed. The staff at the salon told her that, for her own safety, she could only tan for 30 minutes at a time. After the session, she looked in the mirror and found that her skin wasn't even any darker. When she attempted to make an appointment for another 30 minutes on the tanning bed the very next day, the staff informed her that she could only tan twice a week. After her second session, the woman still wasn't satisfied with the result. Fearing that at this rate she would never have a proper tan, the woman came up with a cunning plan. If the salon could only give her 30 minutes, then she would book appointments at every tanning salon in the city, one after the other. She spent the next 4 days going from one tanning salon to another, lying on sunbed after sunbed. Even though her skin was beginning to get a little bit darker, she was worried that it wouldn't be brown enough by the time her wedding day arrived. She went to a shop and bought a special brand of tanning lotion. This particular lotion was only supposed to be used by people who had rare skin conditions. The tanning lotion was designed to increase the skin's sensitivity to light. She hoped that this would help her skin tan to a lovely golden brown. She slathered the tanning lotion all over her body, letting it all soak in. Then she set off for her tanning bed appointments. Later that day, at the tanning salon, the staff noticed the smell of burning in the air. When they went to investigate, they were horrified to find one of the tanning beds was on fire. After putting out the flames, all that was left on the tanning bed was the charred corpse of the unfortunate woman. When the autopsy was performed, the coroner discovered that the woman's internal organs had been cooked from the inside out. By combining the tanning lotion and the sunbed, she had literally cooked herself alive. The Old Lady, or the Hairy-Armed Hitchhiker. It was Halloween and a young woman was shopping at the mall. She had to pick up some candy and chocolate to hand out to the children in her neighborhood. After buying everything on her list, she paid for her purchases and carried the shopping bags out to the car park. When she was loading her bags into the boot or trunk of her car, she noticed an old lady with a large shopping bag approaching her. "I'm sorry to bother you," said the old lady, "but I missed my bus. Would you be a darling and give me a lift home? My legs are tired and I've been walking all day." The young woman was in a good mood, so she said, "Of course, I'd be happy to. Hop in." She unlocked the door for the old lady and helped her into the passenger seat. Then she walked around and got into the car herself. However, as she was about to drive away, the young woman noticed something that sent chills down her spine. The old lady had hairy arms. Something about the sight of those hairy arms made her extremely uncomfortable. She picked up her purse and began searching through it. "Oh no," she said, "I can't find my credit card. I must have left it in the mall. Can you wait here for a few minutes while I go back and see if anybody's found it?" The old lady nodded. The young woman returned to the mall and found a security guard. She told him about the old lady in her car. Together, they went back to the parking lot, but the young woman's car was empty and the passenger door was standing wide open. On the passenger seat of her car lay the large shopping bag that the old woman had been carrying. Inside of the bag, they found a huge butcher's knife and a roll of duct tape. The videotape. Years ago, there was a group of 3 girls who went to high school together. They were all best friends, and one night, during the summer holidays, they decided to have a slumber party. They spent all day planning their slumber party, and because they were all horror fans, they decided to rent a scary movie. It was late at night when the 3 girls piled into a car and drove down to their local video rental store, but it was already closed. The girls spent the next half an hour driving around town looking for a video store that was still open. Eventually they found the little shop that was located in a side street and went inside. The girls could not agree on a film to rent, so one of them went over to the woman behind the counter and asked her if she had any suggestions. The woman told her that she had just the thing for them and disappeared into a back room. While they were waiting, one of the girls noticed a videotape lying on the counter. It didn't have a box cover or a label, and it seemed to be very dirty and stained. She was curious to see what it was and reached out to pick it up. Just then, the woman came rushing out of the back room and slammed her hand down on the tape, pulling it away. With a strange smile on her face, she said, "That's not something you girls should be watching." When they asked her what it was, the woman told them not to touch it, and all she would say is that it was a home movie. Then she handed them an old horror film and told them it would be a much better movie for them to watch. Eventually, the girls agreed to rent the tape that the woman suggested. While she was in the back room searching for the film, one of the girls took the opportunity to swipe the mysterious videotape and stuffed it into her purse. Later that night, when the girls returned home, the girl who stole the videotape took it out of her purse and convinced the other 2 that they should watch it. They put the tape in the video recorder and pressed play. All of a sudden, the power went out, and the room was plunged into darkness, However, the television was still on. With a crackle of static, the video started playing, and on the screen they saw a woman tied to a wooden stake. She was surrounded by angry men and women who were carrying burning torches. They were shouting and spitting on her, and then they set fire to the wood beneath the woman's feet. The woman began laughing maniacally, and the people yelled out things like, "Burn the witch," and "This is your punishment for practicing black magic." As the flames rose higher and higher, licking at the woman's face, she screamed out a curse, saying that all who witness her death will suffer the same fate in 2 days' time. There was the screech of static, and a VCR began making skipping sounds before it suddenly cut off. The terrified girls sat in the dark for a long time until the power came back on. They tried to convince each other that it must have been some type of prank. After a while, they agreed that they should return the tape immediately. When they arrived at the location of the video store, it was gone. All they found was an abandoned building and an empty lot. 2 days later, all 3 of the girls were dead. The first girl was found floating in a swimming pool. Her body was burned beyond recognition. The charred remains of the second girl were discovered in the middle of a park, and the third girl's body was found in a furnace. When the police were investigating the mysterious deaths, they thought it was a very strange coincidence that all 3 girls had burned to death on the same day. In each case, the police thought it had been spontaneous combustion, but the weirdest thing about that was that there was nothing around them that was even singed by the flames. They found a trash can outside of the house that one of the girls lived at. It had been set on fire and was burned out. Everything inside of it was destroyed, except for a single videotape, which had inexplicably been left untouched by the flames. Thank you all for listening. That wraps up our first volume on Urban Legends. I hope you come back for volume 2. Until then, sweet dreams.